But in our little book here, we have a warning on it that it's sort of like a cosmetic warning on a prescription drug or something. This presentation may prove damaging to the comfort of closely held presuppositions. And we don't try to play favorites. We'll have something in this briefing to offend everybody. So we'll do what we can there. And so our ministry has really based on two discoveries. And these discoveries you should not take because I assert them. I want you to challenge them in your own study. The discovery is that these 66 books that we glibly call the Bible, even though they were penned by over 40 different guys who didn't even know each other, and yet, despite that, there's 66 books, over 40 authors, and this was gathered over a period of about 2,000 years. Now, the significant discovery that comes out of this is that there are two discoveries. The first is that these 66 books, penned by over 40 different guys over several thousand years, is an integrated message system. I'm using that as a technical term. I'm not saying that there's a theme in the Old Testament fulfilled in the New. No, much more than that. The thing you need to discover is that every number, every place name, every detail in those 66 books is there by deliberate design. And that's something you need to discover for yourself, because if once you discover that, it changes your perspective in regarding the integrity of the whole, not just in broad brush sense, in a very detailed way. When you discover that, you stumble into a second discovery about that the origin of that package had to originate from outside our time domain. It has supernatural origin, and you can prove that very simply by doing just what I said. So I want to challenge you with that and to dwell on that as we go. So one of the places we're going to go, now I know this is going to make some people nervous here, but just bear with me, are there hidden messages in the Bible? And that is mentioned several places. One way is in Proverbs 25:2. It's the glory of God to conceal a thing, and the duty or honor of kings to find them out. So I'm going to show you some of those things as an example. Let's start with the riddle. We all know who's the oldest man in the Bible. Anybody? Who's the oldest man in the Bible? Anybody? Methuselah. Good for you. He lived 969 years. And yet he died before his father. Does that bother you? He's the oldest man in the Bible, but he died before his father. See, everybody forgets who his father was. And so his father was Enoch, right? Now, Enoch's an interesting guy. We know quite a bit about Enoch, strangely enough. When he was 65 years old, something happened in his life which caused him from that day on to walk with God, whatever that means. Okay? What happened there? Something else you need to understand. The flood of Noah did not come as a surprise. The flood of Noah was preached on for 4 generations. And Enoch was told that as long as his newly born son is alive, the judgment of that flood would be withheld. And that's why he named him Methuselah. As you analyze that word in the Hebrew, it comes from a root, muth, which means his death. It occurs 125 times in the Old Testament. And the verb shalach, which means to send forth, to bring or sent forth. The name Methuselah actually means, from the roots, his death shall bring. And it's interesting, as you study your Bible, Methuselah lived 187 years, and then he had a son by the name of Lamech. And Lamech when he was 182, he had a son by the name of Noah. And we know that it was in the 600th year of Noah that the flood came. In other words, Methuselah's life was a duration of God's mercy, but it got to a point when the judgment came. So he fulfilled that prophecy. You girls, can you imagine raising that kid? Every time he caught a cold, the entire neighborhood would go into panic. As long as he's alive, everything's fine. But when he died, the flood came. Now, what's interesting about this is, when you get to Genesis chapter 5, we tend to sort of skip over it. Genesis 1 and 2, the creation, that's great stuff. Genesis 3 is the seed plot for the whole Bible. Genesis 4, the murder, and so forth. And Genesis 6 on is the flood of Noah. Genesis 5 is one of those chapters you have a tendency to skip over. I mean, what is it? It's just a genealogy of 10 guys, okay? Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Yared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. The problem with Genesis 5 is that it's not translated for you. Most of us are operating from an English translation. In this case, those names are transliterated. The meaning isn't there. It's an approximation of how they pronounced it. And so we don't know how to deal with it. See, what do names mean? My legal name is Charles. What does that mean? Nobody knows. It's been lost. People have different conjectures, but no one's quite sure. Many of us in this room probably have names that were just given to us by our parents because it appealed to them at the time. It doesn't necessarily carry significance. But in Hebrew, it's a whole other thing. Many of you may not realize that Hebrew is the only language that's sememic, not just phonetic. Most alphabets are phonetic. They lend insight as to how you pronounce a word. Hebrew is unique in that the original Hebrew, the Paleo-Hebrew, symbolized a concept, not just a sound, a meaning. The first letter was written sort of like an oxen's head. It represented strength or first. Aleph, that's what it originally meant. After the Babylonian captivity, Hebrew adopted a boxed form that we see today. It's lost its roots from its original Paleo-Hebrew. The Hebrew department of the University of Arizona pointed out to me that if they teach the kids the Paleo-Hebrew letters, which will remind them of the meaning of the letter, they can end up, that takes maybe an hour to learn, they can read about 80% of Hebrew, because Hebrew verbs especially, but Hebrew words are based on a 3-letter root. And if you know the alphabet, the meaning of the alphabet, you can know what the word will mean. The aleph there typically means first or strength, or leader, if you will. The second letter is bet, originally written like it is on the left. Today it's written a little differently, but that bet represented a house or home. And bet, that's what it means. It means house or family. Bethlehem, the house of bread. Bethel, the house of God. See, the letter itself carries meaning. It's a sememe, not just a phoneme. And so if you take an aleph and a bet together, that's the first or the leader of the house. Who's the leader of the house? That's their name for father, you see. Abba, father, okay? And if you take the letter he, which is a breath, like an open window or two arms reach up, the word he is a breath or spirit, if you will. If you put a he in the middle of the word, it represents the essence of that word. And if you take, it comes from hands lifted up, what have you. So it means behold or revealed or wind or spirit. Breeze, wind is a he. And so if you take the ab, the aleph, and the beth, put the he right in the middle of it, that gives you the essence of the Father. You following me? What is the essence of the Father? It's the word is love. Ahab is the Hebrew word for love. See, the point I'm trying to get across is in the Hebrew, the letters themselves carry the meaning, not just the sound. And that's why if you understand that, you can generally infer the meaning of the word from the structure of the letters. And so now when remember Abram and Sarai, I should say, changed their name. When God changed the name, what he did was he added a he in the name. He inserted the Spirit of God in their lives, and Abram became Abraham and so forth. Well, let's get back to our little genealogy. Bear with me in Genesis 5. The first one is Adam, and that's pretty straightforward. Adamah means man, no problem there. So his son, Seth, means appointed. In this case, chapter 4, the earlier chapter in Genesis, Eve explains it. Eve said, "For God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, who came slew." So the name Seth means appointed. Okay, we're getting somewhere. The next one is Enosh, and that is a verb which means mortal, frail, or miserable, from the root anash, which is usually used of a wound or grief or something like that. Pretty tough handle to go through school with. He has a son by the name of Kenan. Not Canaan, as some of your Bibles say, it's Kenan, because Balaam, in fact, does a pun on those names in Numbers. But the point is, that word can mean sorrow, dirge, or elder. That's another tough label to go through school with. Hey, sorrow, you're on our team. It's a pretty tough name. So when he has a son, he says, enough of this. He named his son a mouthful, but a great name. He called his son Mahalalel. Mahal, which means the blessed or praised one, and El, of course, the name for God. So Mahalalel, it's a mouthful, but what it means is the blessed God or the praised God. So far, so good. Now his son is named Yared, which is a verb meaning to come down, and there's a whole story behind that I'll spare you for this particular discussion. And he has a son by the name of Enoch, which we've mentioned already, but what does the name Enoch mean? It turns out it's an academic term. It means commencements or teaching, if you will. And Enoch, of course, as I said before, had a son by the name of Methuselah, and of course that was his death shall bring, and that was the year when he dies is the year the flood came. We went through that. He has a son by the name of Lamech, and this is a case where the root is still available to us in our English. The root there, we see it in lament or lamentation, and Lamech means despairing. It's a root that implies despairing. And Lamech has a son by the name of Noah. How many of you have heard of Noah? I have about 60%, Graham. That's scary. Okay, I'm kidding, of course. Okay, Noah. It's derived from the Hebrew word nacham, which means to bring relief or comfort. In fact, comfort or rest is what the term implies. And in fact, his father he calls his name Noah, saying, "The same shall comfort us." The name Noah means comfort or rest. Okay, so you've been with me so far. We have a genealogy here then of 10 people: Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Yared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. Let's not transliterate it, let's translate it. What do those names mean? Well, Adam means man, Seth means appointed, Enosh means mortal, Kenan means sorrow, Mahalalel means the blessed God, Yared means shall come down, Enoch teaching, Methuselah his death shall bring, Lamech the despairing, and Noah comfort or rest. Man's appointed mortal sorrow. But the blessed God shall come down teaching that his death shall bring. Whose death? God's death. Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down teaching that his death shall bring the despairing comfort or rest. Wow, every time I do this, I get goosebumps. Now there's no way, this has several implications. There's no way you'll ever convince me that a group of Jewish rabbis conspired to hide a summary of the New Testament Christian gospel in a genealogy in the Torah? No way. This also tells you that God's plan for man was not a knee-jerk reaction to a surprise. He and the Son planned the redemption before the foundation of the earth. Ephesians 1:4 will confirm that to you, and there's other passages, of course. Breathtaking insight by paying attention to the text. I've studied the Bible for about 65 years, and all through those years, I often had to change my views as I learned more. But in summarizing all that, I was stunned to realize that every time I had to change my views about the text, it was always in the direction of taking it more seriously than before. As an information scientist, I've now learned that the key is precision. Be precise with words. You sometimes have to be even more precise than your translators were. You need to do a little bit of homework.